Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to GoldwingDocs, episode 15. You got questions, we got answers coming up next. It's a beautiful day here in Ohio, not a cloud in the sky. It's 68 degrees. It's supposed to be like this all day. I'm gonna crank out a bunch of these videos today so that I can get out and go riding. Let's get started. Question 1 from Dave Riedel. I have a 1989 GL 1500. When I have my bike on cruise control and turn on either the left or the right turn signal, the cruise kicks off. Is that normal? If not, where to start troubleshooting? No, it's not normal. Obviously, if you're on the highway and you have your cruise control on and you want a signal to change lanes, you don't want your cruise control kicking off. That's not normal at all. So, no. Generally, whenever you have two unrelated systems like turn signal and cruise control affecting one another, almost always the cause is a bad ground. So what happens is you might have a ground that is backfeeding. So let's say you have a bad ground on your cruise control computer. It's going to find another way to ground. And often the way it finds that ground is through something like a brake light filament or a turn signal filament, in ways that you normally wouldn't expect. I mean, that's not right, but it'll work because there's enough of a good ground through that filament that the thing will actually operate. So let's say in your instance, you have the turn signal, it's not turned on, so it has a ground that the cruise control is finding its way to. So the cruise control has enough of a ground that it's actually functioning. However, then you go to turn the turn signal on, and the turn signal all of a sudden sends voltage there, and now it's using its ground. So the potential on that ground comes up. The ECU for the cruise control no longer has a good enough ground going there, and so it loses that ground. It shuts off. That's typically what a bad ground will manifest itself as when you have unrelated failures such as this. I would start looking at the ground for your cruise control. So you asked where you would start troubleshooting. That's where I would start. Bad grounds like that are typically tough to find. A lot of the time, what I will do is I'll find the ground from the thing that's malfunctioning, in this case, the cruise control computer, find that ground and just run a new one to a known good ground spot, either on a ground log on the frame, sometimes right to the battery. In my case, I have a terminal strip that's just grounds that I can run to. That way you know it has a good ground. Often that will fix the problem without having to try to find where in the wiring harness the ground could have gone bad. All right, question 2, Wayne Harris. I currently have a 1988 with 68,000 miles and a 97 with 40,000 miles. The cruise on the 97 will not engage. The cruise light comes on, the set light comes on, but the cruise does not engage. The fuses and the relays are all okay. I can swap parts from the 88 as its cruise works perfectly. Any advice where to start? Okay, so from what you're saying, it looks like the cruise control is working. When you hit the set button, the cruise set light comes on, so it looks like it's actually working, but the cruise doesn't actually turn on. So we're looking probably more at a mechanical issue than an electrical issue. There's two things I would look at to start with. The first is the cruise relay. It's kind of a relay slash solenoid that is used by the cruise computer to tell the vacuum solenoid when and how to adjust the vacuum that's actually operating your throttle. If that cruise relay is malfunctioning, it's not operating anymore, obviously then that's something you may want to look at swapping from your 87 or 97, 88, from your 88, or find a used one. The second is the vacuum system itself. It has an accumulator and vacuum lines and so on that's used to actually operate the various devices. If there's a vacuum leak in there, you can command the cruise all day long, but it's not going to work because you've got a vacuum leak. In which case, you're probably going to notice a little bit of a problem with your engine as well because you've got a vacuum leak, so it's going to be running lean. Lastly is the actuator itself, which you'll find up underneath this left side section here, that physically connects to the throttle, and that's what the vacuum actually operates to change the throttle setting on the motorcycle. So any one of those things I would have a look at. An easy way to check for a vacuum leak or something of that sort there, just spray some brake cleaner or If you take a propane torch unlit, just move it in and around that section. If the engine starts speeding up, then it's a pretty good indication that you have a vacuum leak. From Dennis Kukan, I have a 1997 SE 1500. The cruise does not work. The light comes on, but that's it. Okay, so this is another cruise control. I know I got lots of cruise control questions on this episode. The light comes on, which is the main power, but when he presses set, nothing happens. So there's a few different things that can cause that. Now, cruise control problems, I typically don't answer because, well, in the service manual, the section for diagnosing cruise control problems is 10 pages long. It's really complex, so I try not to give quick answers to cruise control problems because typically there are none. But in this case, there's a few things you can check. One is your switches, the brake switch, the cruise switch, the clutch switch. In the case of the clutch switch, as you squeeze it in, there's actually 2 clicks. You hear the first click when you first start squeezing the clutch, and then as you squeeze it in all the way, there's the second click. So those 2 switches, the first one is the cruise disconnect, the second one is the starter. So it's the first one we're interested in. If that switch goes bad, and they do go bad, then you can have a problem where the cruise won't engage. Same thing on either of the brake switches for the front or the rear. Throttle switch, there's actually a switch that when if you push the throttle off when the cruise control is on, you roll off the throttle, there's a switch that'll actually disconnect. Lastly is the gear position switch. If your gear position switch is indicating anything other than 4th or 5th gear, then the cruise control isn't going to work. That said, also, make sure you're in 4th or 5th gear before you try to engage the cruise control, or else it's not going to work. All right, Ken B with a non-cruise control question. I have a 1984 Goldwing 1200, and sometimes when I'm out riding, like for half an hour or longer, and not all the time when I shut the bike off, it does not want to start again. I turn the key on and there's nothing. No headlights, no dash lights, nothing. And if I leave the key on for any 20 minutes to an hour, all of a sudden it'll just come back to life and it'll fire up, but only if they leave the key on. Do you think it's one of the relays getting overheated, and how do I tell which one? Possibly relay, but more often this is heat related, and it's usually heat related to one of the primary power wires. So I'm talking battery, ground. So when your bike gets hot, things expand, and we're talking about electrical things like wires or batteries. You can actually break a connection. So something that may work just fine when it's cold and it heats up and expands, and you actually end up with a gap that won't pass electrical power, and it all fails. When it cools off, it goes back together, electricity is restored, everything's working fine again. So what you want to do is get your bike good and hot so the electrical fails like you're talking about, then check to see where that electrical is failing. Check the battery terminals. Do you have power at the batteries? Sometimes the battery itself fails, it gets hot and something inside that's cracked opens up, you have no power. If that's the case, fix is easy, just replace your battery. Then check the cables connecting to the battery, the terminals where they connect to the battery. If you have power at the battery, then see how far that power goes. Do you have power at the end of the cable that's connected to the battery? Do you have power at the fuse box? Also check the master fuse. Actually pull the master fuse out and check it electrically. Often they will get a hairline crack in there that when they heat up, it comes apart and you lose all power. And when it cools off, it comes back together and gives you your power back again. By looking at it, you typically can't tell that it's failed because it just has that little hairline crack. So actually take it out of the bike, measure it, and make sure there's power there. Also, you can, obviously, if the bike is dead with no power, just make sure you have power on both sides of the dog bone fuse, that master fuse. And if you only have power on one side, obviously that's your problem. If it's the relay, give the relay a little whack with a handle of a screwdriver. When relays stop to fail intermittently like that, often you can just give it a good whack with something like that and it will fix it temporarily, and that will give you an indication that that's the problem. It could be a fuse that's getting hot inside. So pull the fuses and make sure that something hasn't melted and oxidized in there. So basically it's a little bit of a detective work. Follow the electricity, see where it goes, and where the electricity stops, that's where your problem is. All right, that's 4 questions for this episode. If you like what you saw, please click like, subscribe, click that little bell. It lets you get notified when we post a video like this. And don't forget to check out the GoldwingDocs forum. 91,000 members, Goldwing owners just like you, friendly people just waiting to say hi. Thanks for watching. When the bike is dead and it's hot. Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to episode 15 of Scott Synth Stuff. Yes, I have more than one YouTube channel. Okay,